When Jakub and André Mauers found themselves trapped in their Aunt Clara's house, no one could have predicted that their lives would turn into a nightmare. Behind the closed doors of this seemingly ordinary Czech family lay the darkest secrets and horrifying truths. Klara Mauerova, outwardly a calm and loving mother, turned out to be a cruel executioner, organizing a hellish existence for her nephews. For many long months, they were subjected to unimaginable tortures that cannot be described without shuddering. What drove this woman to such monstrous actions? What role did her accomplices and close associates play in these events? Today, we will lift the veil of secrecy and tell you about the shocking events that shook the entire Czech Republic and caused a wave of outrage worldwide. This is a story not just about cruelty and violence, but about lost childhoods, ruined lives, and broken fates. Prepare to dive into the very heart of darkness and horror. We will start our detective investigation from the very beginning and go through all the stages, uncovering evidence, suspects, and the motivation behind this horrifying tragedy. Klara Mauerova and her nephews, Jakub and André, lived in the small Czech town of Kuzim. At first glance, their family did not arouse suspicion, but neighbors began to notice oddities. Klara was always reserved, but in recent months her behavior had become especially suspicious. The children were seen less and less, and strange sounds from the house alarmed the neighbors. Klara claimed that it was just children's mischief, but some neighbors felt that something was wrong. They tried to find out what was happening, but Klara avoided conversations, further increasing suspicions. Gradually, rumors of possible violence in the family began to spread in the town, leading to active discussion and growing concern among residents. These rumors could not go unnoticed, and soon Klara Mauerova's neighbors began to act. They repeatedly noticed oddities in her behavior and tried to understand what was happening in the house. They heard screams and moans coming from the house, especially at night. Some of them even tried to talk to Klara, but she always found excuses and dissuaded them from interfering. Gradually, the neighbors began discussing among themselves that the children might be in danger. Their persistence and suspicion eventually played a key role in uncovering the crimes, as they did not give up trying to find out the truth. One of the neighbors accidentally stumbled upon a baby monitor signal, which became the beginning of the end for Klara's tyrannical regime. The story came to light by chance. Klara's neighbor, who used a radio monitor to watch over his children, accidentally tuned the device to the signal of a baby monitor from the Mauerova house. What he saw shocked him. Jakub and André were locked in the basement, chained and subjected to brutal abuse. The neighbor immediately called the police and an investigation began, revealing horrifying details of what was happening in the house. The police took immediate action to rescue the children and arrest Klara. Shortly after, an intensive process of gathering evidence and searching for all those involved in these crimes began. During the search of the house, the police discovered numerous pieces of evidence confirming the abuse of the children. Among them were chains, handcuffs, and other torture instruments. They also found diaries in which Klara and her accomplices detailed their actions and motives. Video recordings made by Klara showed how she and her accomplices subjected the children to physical and psychological torture. These pieces of evidence became key in the case against Klara and her accomplices, shocking even the most experienced investigators. These materials left no doubt about the guilt of the accused and became the basis for prosecution. Klara Mauerova turned out to be not just a cruel aunt, but the leader of this system of torture. Her motivation was complex and multi-layered. According to psychologists, she suffered from a mental disorder that made her believe such methods would help control and protect the children. However, her actions went far beyond mere control. Klara claimed to be on a higher mission and believed that her cruelty was justified. This distorted view of reality allowed her to commit horrific acts without remorse. Her beliefs and control over those around her turned the house in Kuzim into a real hell for the children. Along with Klara, her accomplices, Anna and Barbara Skripal, were also arrested. These women played key roles in the tortures, actively assisting Klara in her monstrous actions. Their motives were also complex. According to investigators, they were under strong influence from Klara and her beliefs. They believed that by acting this way, they were purifying the children and fulfilling a mission. During the investigation, it became clear that both women were subjected to psychological pressure from Klara and had effectively become her blind followers. Their testimonies showed complete devotion to Klara and confidence in the correctness of their actions. The psychological profile of Klara Mauerova and her accomplices paints a picture of deeply traumatized individuals with disturbed psyches. Their actions go beyond normal understanding, and their motives require deep analysis. Klara, in particular, believed that her actions were justified, indicating serious mental deviations. Psychiatrists identified signs of paranoid disorder and manic tendencies in her. This helped the investigation understand how she could convince others of her ideas and make them participate in the brutal tortures. The psychological analysis also revealed similar problems in her accomplices, creating a powerful toxic dynamic in the group. The sect to which Klara belonged preached brutal methods of upbringing and total control over children. This ideology significantly influenced her actions and motives. Investigators and psychologists conducted numerous interviews and studies to understand how the sect could infiltrate the minds of its followers so deeply. Klara, succumbing to the sect's influence, believed in the necessity of brutal methods to achieve purification. This explains her ruthlessness and cruelty towards her nephews. Such sects often use psychological pressure and manipulation, making their influence extremely dangerous. The details of the torture Jakub and Andrei endured shocked even experienced investigators. The children were subjected to physical punishment, starvation, prolonged confinement in small spaces, and psychological abuse. They were deprived of basic human needs and constantly lived in fear. Klara and her accomplices carefully planned and executed their brutal actions, making this crime particularly horrifying. These horrifying methods became the subject of thorough study and analysis, revealing the full depth of the criminals' cruelty. Investigators meticulously documented each abuse to present a complete picture of what happened. The tortures inflicted on Jakub and Andrei left deep psychological and physical scars. The children went through unimaginable suffering, which affected their future lives. They lost trust in adults, and recovering their mental health took a long time. Psychologists who worked with them after their liberation noted severe mental trauma and a long recovery process. Despite this, the children showed incredible strength of spirit and a desire to start a new life. Their story became an example of human resilience and willpower in the face of monstrous trials. After their liberation, Jakub and Andrei were sent to rehabilitation centers where they received the necessary medical and psychological assistance. The recovery process was long and difficult, but the children gradually began to return to normal life. They were helped by specialists and the support of new foster families. Their story became a symbol of hope and resilience in the face of horrifying trials. Gradually, they began to believe in the possibility of a happy future and were able to return to school and play. Rehabilitation included intensive therapy, social support, and constant monitoring by specialists. The social services that were supposed to monitor the well-being of the children failed in their duties in this case. Numerous signals and complaints from neighbors went unheeded, allowing Klara to continue her horrific actions. This failure became the subject of public discussion and criticism. Subsequently, many reforms were implemented to improve the child protection system. This case became an example of the importance of timely response to alarming signals and thorough checks. Enhancing the qualifications and responsibility of social workers became a key direction of the reforms. The trial of Klara Mauerova and her accomplices was long and complex. Defense lawyers tried to present them as victims of circumstances and mental illnesses, but the evidence and testimonies of the victims were undeniable. The court handed down harsh sentences, which became an important step towards justice for Jakub and Andrei. The accused received long prison terms, which was welcomed by society. The trial demonstrated that justice can be achieved even in the most complex and convoluted cases. This process became a lesson for the justice system and led to improvements in the procedures for investigating and prosecuting such crimes. The story of Klara Mauerova and her nephews caused a huge public outcry. The horrifying details of the case were widely discussed in the media, and the public demanded fair punishment for all those involved. This case became the subject of numerous debates on how such situations could be prevented. Society was shocked, and many began to actively participate in discussing the problems of domestic violence. This story also drew attention to the need to improve the child protection system and provide assistance to the victims. It is important to note that public outcry helped draw attention to the issue of child abuse and led to significant changes. The case of Klara Mauerova became a catalyst for changes in Czech legislation. New laws and amendments were introduced to improve the child protection system and prevent similar cases in the future. This tragedy became an important lesson for society and the state. The new laws strengthened control over families where there might be problems and improved the procedure for responding to complaints and signals of possible violence. These changes helped prevent many potential tragedies in the future. Legislative reforms included enhancing cooperation between social services and law enforcement agencies, increasing the effectiveness of detecting and preventing cases of child abuse. The investigators who worked on Klara Mauerova's case also experienced enormous psychological pressure. Investigating this horrifying crime left a deep mark on their professional and personal lives. Many of them shared their stories and experiences in interviews and books. Working on this case required maximum concentration and emotional stability. Their efforts were aimed at ensuring justice and protection for the victimized children. Many investigators talked about how this case changed their view of the world and their profession. These stories show how difficult it is to work with such cases and how important the emotional health of law enforcement officers is. The media played a key role in covering this case. Newspapers, television, and the internet actively discussed all aspects of the tragedy, drawing public attention and causing a wave of outrage. This story became the subject of numerous articles, documentaries, and TV shows. The public actively discussed the problem of domestic violence and the need for stricter measures to protect children. The media helped draw attention to this problem and contributed to changes in legislation. The media also played an important role in informing the public about children's rights and the importance of their protection, leading to greater awareness and active measures. The Mauerova family was never able to recover after this case. Broken relationships, lost trust, and deep psychological traumas became the inevitable result of these horrific events. The story of Klara Mauerova remains a grim reminder of the importance of protecting children and preventing domestic violence. Despite the help of specialists, the victimized children still need support. Their lives were divided into before and after, and many aspects of their future remain uncertain. The family dynamics were destroyed, and even those not directly involved in the crimes experienced serious emotional and psychological difficulties. Klara Mauerova's mental state became the subject of numerous studies and debates. Psychiatrists and psychologists analyzed her behavior, life history, and motives to understand what could have led her to such monstrous actions. This aspect of the case remains important for understanding the entire tragedy. Klara was subjected to numerous psychological problems, exacerbated by the influence of the sect. These factors combined led to her ruthless actions and inability to adequately assess reality. Psychological studies also showed that her actions could be the result of prolonged exposure to manipulative and controlling techniques used by the sect. The tragedy in the Mauerova family had long-term consequences not only for the victimized children, but also for society as a whole. This story became a catalyst for a deeper understanding of the problem of domestic violence and the importance of creating effective mechanisms for child protection. The introduction of new educational programs for social workers, police officers, and teachers helped increase their awareness and improve skills in identifying and preventing such cases. Society became more sensitive and attentive to signs of possible violence. This story showed that constant efforts are needed to ensure children's safety and prevent abuse. After this case was uncovered, public organizations and government services intensified their efforts to provide assistance to the victimized children and their families. Specialized centers were created where children could receive the necessary medical and psychological help. These centers became an important element in the support system for victims, providing not only emergency assistance, but also long-term support in the process of rehabilitation and integration into society. Social support also included working with foster families and ensuring that the children had everything they needed for a normal life and development. The Mauerova story resonated beyond the Czech Republic. The international community followed the events with horror, and many countries expressed their support in the fight against child abuse. International organizations, such as UNICEF, launched campaigns aimed at drawing attention to the problem and providing assistance to the victims. This tragedy became a reminder to the entire world of the need for joint efforts in protecting children's rights. The international community also provided help in the form of sharing experiences and best practices to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The Mauerova tragedy also influenced the next generation. Young people, learning about what happened, became more actively involved in volunteer programs and initiatives aimed at helping children in difficult life situations. This story inspired many to create organizations and funds working in the field of children's rights protection and violence prevention. Thus, the horrific events led to positive changes in society, raising awareness of the importance of protecting children. Young people became more active in fighting for children's rights and preventing violence, creating a new generation of child rights defenders. However, during the investigation, one unexpected detail emerged. Klara Mauerova was a member of a sect that preached brutal methods of upbringing and control over children. This information came as a shock to many and added new dimensions to understanding her motivation and actions. This discovery allowed investigators to understand why Klara and her accomplices acted with such cruelty. The sect instilled perverse views on upbringing in its followers, which led to these horrific events. The revelation of the sect's connection showed how dangerous extremist groups can be, and how they can exploit vulnerable people for their purposes.